Today, we're going to figure out your exact get out of debt date. Welcome to Get It Together, and if you're new here, this channel is just me trying to figure out how to get my life together and sharing the tips and lessons I learned along the way. And as you may have gathered from the very short intro, today's an exciting day. We're going to be figuring out your exact get out of debt date. If you somehow landed on this video randomly without seeing the previous videos in the series, I'm going to link the whole playlist up here because it's one of these things where you're going to have to start at the beginning. You're also going to be needing the free workbook, link in the description below. And in this episode, we're going to be using pages 13, 14, and 15. Like tradition in this series, there are three things we're going to be accomplishing. The first thing we're going to accomplish is understanding the two main strategies that people use to get out of debt and how I've combined them to my personal favorite strategy. The second thing we're going to be doing is, based on all of our debt sources, we're going to be prioritizing our payback list. And the third thing we're going to be doing, this is the exciting part, is we're going to figure out your exact get out of debt date. Let's hop right into it, into thing number one. When it comes to paying off debt, there are two main strategies that people use. Now, the most financially sensible way is to pay off your debt and prioritize all of your debt sources in order of which one has the highest interest rate. And this makes logical sense because the higher the interest rate, the more money you're just throwing away in interest fees. So why is there another way? Well, the other way is treating us like humans, understanding the challenges and the complexities of juggling a whole bunch of different sources of debt. The second way is to prioritize in order of how much you owe, from the least to the most. The reason for this is because as human beings, like I said, we're juggling, right? If we have multiple sources of debt, we're juggling a whole bunch. And if we owe like $300 on something and we're able to just pay it off sooner, even if it has a lower interest rate than something else, the fact of the matter is that we'll actually be able to pay it off really, really fast. And then the amount of sources that we juggle reduces by one. The way I personally recommend is kind of a combination of the two, where I like to break things out into two categories. The first category are sources of debt that we owe $500 or less on. And then the second category is sources of debt in order of highest interest rate to lowest interest rate. So how I prioritize is the very first thing I pay off is the absolute lowest amount that I owe on a source of debt, that's $500 or less. To use myself as an example, I had nearly 10 different sources of debt, but 3 of them I actually owed $500 or less on. By prioritizing them first, even though their interest rates were lower than, let's say, my regular credit card that I owed like $7,000 on, I was able to pay them off relatively quickly, which means that of the nearly 10 sources of debt, inside of a few months, I was able to get rid of 3 of them. And so the amount of things that I was juggling automatically reduced, and a lot of the weight of my shoulders started to come down. After that prioritization, anything above $500, that's where I start paying it off based on the interest rate. Whatever is the highest interest rate, I try to pay off as fast as possible. Now, I use $500 as a random example. You are the expert of your life, and you're most certainly the expert on your actual debt sources and how much you owe. So for some people, it may be $200. For some people, it may be $1,000. The exact dollar amount isn't important. What's important, at least in my opinion, is to first get rid of the lowest hanging fruit, paying off the things that are relatively quickly to pay off just to reduce the amount of sources of debt you're juggling, and then focusing on those sources with the highest interest rates. So now with the rough strategy explanation out of the way, we can move on to the second thing we're going to be accomplishing on the video, and that's quite literally listing out in order of priority, however you choose to pay off your debt sources. And that's all accomplished on page 14. As you can see on page 14, really simple, it's really just a list. There are 3 columns on the list. Column 1 is the name of the source of the debt, column 2 is the interest rate, and column 3 is the total amount of debt that you owe at the moment. Whichever strategy you choose, whether it's starting with the highest interest rate or starting with the lowest amount owed, or a combination of the two, this is where you're going to be putting them into the exact priority that works for you. I want to remind you that there really is no right or wrong. The fact is that you're already taking a huge step and making a list, period. But do take a little bit of time being introspective with self-awareness to understand what's going to be easier for you to be able to clear off all of your debt sources. And moving on to the last thing we're going to be accomplishing, and this really, to me at least, was the most exciting thing ever, which was identifying, based on all of the numbers that we've already worked towards understanding, the exact get out of debt date. This one's going to need a little bit of math, so break out that calculator app and let's get started. So diving into the form on page 15, you can see that there are a few columns. We have the debt priority column, then there's the name of the debt source column, then there's a total amount of money owed, and then there's the calculation column, and this is the one where you're going to need that calculator app. But basically the formula we're going to be using here is pretty simple. It's based on each of the rows, whatever the total amount owed is, divided by your debt clearing total, and that'll give you a number. And it's probably going to be a decimal number, but that's going to represent the number of months based on your debt clearing total on how long it'll take for you to clear that off. And then from there, you can put the exact date in the very last column. In each of those rows, you're just going to literally take the amount of money you owe. And so I've already populated like a sample debt list here. So as you can see, the very first sample item is a electronic store credit card. I've put the total amount still owing on it at $388. And based on the debt clearing total, when I take the $388 owed divided by my debt clearing total, which is $280, I get a decimal number, which is 1.3857, whatever, I don't know. But basically what that's telling us is it's going to take 1.3 months to pay it off. But as soon as it crosses over 1, then technically it's going to take us 2 months to pay it off. Because again, in this example, we figured out that it's $280 per month as our debt clearing total. And so you can just repeat this down all of your debt sources and you'll get a very simplistic version of it. If you want to be as specific as possible though, we'll use that exact same example where we still start with that electronic store credit card with the $388 owing. But now when we calculate with the calculator app, instead of simply dividing the amount owed by the debt clearing total, take the calculator app, type in 280 because that's the debt clearing total. And then I'm going to press plus 280 equals. And that number is more than the 388 we owe. That number is 560. And so if we want to be hyper specific and we want to maintain a level of discipline throughout this process, as we're planning this form, what we can now say is that yes, it will technically take 2 months to pay it off. However, because 560, which is 2 months worth of our debt clearing total, is more than the 388 we owe, we'll take 560 minus 388, which will give us a total of 172. And that's kind of what's left over from the 560 after we've paid off the 388. And so we'll take that 172 and we'll carry it into the second row where I have here furniture store card. And that furniture store card, as you can see in this random example, is owing $492. So what we're gonna do first is take that 492 that we owe, put it into the calculator app, and then subtract 172, which was the remaining from after we paid off the 388 in the second month. And that'll leave us with a total of 320. Feel free to pause the video right now and just take a look at this sample form that I've filled out, and it should become increasingly clear exactly what I mean by all of this. Regardless of whether you choose the more simplified version or the very exact version, based on the number of months on each one, you'll be able to start identifying on the very last column of each row the exact month that you're going to be able to clear off that source of debt. When you get to the very last row and the last source of debt and you figure out that date, whether you use the simplified or the very specified calculation version, you have figured out your exact get out of debt date. Now, if you're really observant and you're a stickler for detail, you may have noticed, wait, I didn't factor in the fact that you're going to be constantly charged interest on all of the other sources of debt. So won't it take actually longer because I'll keep owing more just based on interest alone by the time I get to my very last source of debt? And the answer is no, absolutely not. Remember, this debt clearing total, this monthly amount of money that you have left over after what's sacred, the cost of survival, the cost of sanity, and the cost of servicing debt, is already factoring servicing debt, which means that this debt clearing total is actually already factoring the fact that you're consistently making at least your minimum payments on all of your sources of debt as you chip away on the priority ones. This means that based on the minimum payments, you're always going to be consistently slightly chipping into that principal, which means that in fact, that debt clearing date is kind of a little trick. If you actually stick to this plan, you're actually going to get out of debt before that debt clearing date. Speaking of principal and interest, if you haven't seen the video where I talked about the jargon that's used, you can click right here to get a really quick crash course on all of the different terminology on your bill. Another thing I have to say is that seeing that date, that exact get out of debt date, at least for me, lifted a whole lot of weight off my shoulders to see that light at the end of the tunnel, because you put in the work to actually turn that light on. Regardless of this though, if it really does feel daunting to have to stick with this for a number of years, stay tuned for the next videos where I show you how to really accelerate getting out of debt.